The Final Fantasy VII Rebirth Ultimania is finally here, a book with developer interviews, detailing the deepest story secrets of the game, as well as what we can expect from Part 3, although the book is currently only available in Japanese. Dedicated fans have been dropping translations of it, giving us a ton of brand new updates, clarification on existing story threads, and some incredibly fun teases on where Final Fantasy VII Re-Trilogy might go with Part 3. So go ahead and smash that subscribe button. We just crossed over 96,000 on our way to 100k, and now let's crush 97,000 together as well. Today's updates come via Shinra Archaeology Department, and if you guys aren't familiar with Shinra Arc, you will want to be. These are guys who do incredible translations of all FF7 materials over the years. Many interviews and information that would never make its way to English speakers can finally make its way to the fans here thanks to their translations. Now unfortunately, they were not able to give direct translations on everything, as Square Enix didn't want them posting all of the official information. However, they can give us paraphrased information about what the developers have said. Keep that in mind as we go through all of the information. The first thing I want to talk about is something that I personally am extremely passionate about: airships. It has been confirmed that the Highwind is returning for Part 3, and yes, it is going to be playable. However, they do talk about a lot of the technical challenges that have gone into making the Highwind work. Airships have gone away in recent Final Fantasies for pretty good reason. Making them work on a technical level is incredibly difficult to do. For starters, you have to build a seamlessly connected open world for you to even fly the airship across in the first place. However, there is one issue that people haven't really thought about, that Nomura brings attention to in this interview, that adds yet another layer of difficulty to creating airships in a modern Final Fantasy title. Here is what he's had to say in the Rebirth Ultimania. Tetsuya Nomura considers implementing an airship to be the single biggest obstacle posed by Part 3 of the Final Fantasy VII Remake project. He's worried about needing wide, flat surfaces to land such a giant aircraft, and fears this might limit how freely the vehicle can be used. Nomura says this is an issue the developers have been struggling with for a while. It used to be you could land an airship icon on a cartoonish map, but with the graphical scale now more realistic, this no longer suffices. However, he's confident the staff will rise to the occasion. Again, this is one of those things that you never really think about when implementing airships, but having a way to land them is a really huge technical challenge to overcome. With Final Fantasy XV, the way this was implemented with that airship was that your car would essentially land back on the road. Indeed, landing the Regalia is the most difficult boss fight in all of Final Fantasy XV, while flying in the game is incredibly fun. The landing is certainly not, and hopefully landing the Highwinds will not be nearly as tedious. The next few tweets will contain some in-game spoilers, so just a heads up for those who haven't finished the game, which will likely be spoiled by some of the following information. So this is your chance to click off of the video now if you want to. And if you're staying with us, this is the time that we talk about timelines. We see at least 5 worlds throughout the course of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. These are represented by different breeds of stamp: Beagle, Yorkshire Terrier, Pug, Corgi, and Chihuahua. It's also possible that Zack's final scene in the church takes place in a different world, 6th world. Indeed, many people wondered where that scene with Zack in Intermission was taking place, as the scene at the end of Intermission where Zack is about to open the church door doesn't really fit in chronologically with Zack of the Terrier timeline. Now we know that was possibly Zack in yet another world. Shinra Arc's translation continues by saying, Beagle is the main world of Cloud & Co., while Terrier is the world where Zack survived. 2 additional worlds, Pug and Corgi, split off from the Terrier thanks to the alternative choices Zack makes. Meanwhile, Chihuahua is a 5th world where Cloud and Aerith take a stroll. The Ultimania indicates that the world where Zack attempts to meet Hojo and find a cure for Cloud is a continuation of the Terrier world, and not a separate new one that has split off. For many of you, this may be sounding kind of convoluted by this this point. And yes, this story is going to have quite a lot to keep track of. There's been a lot of discourse recently on how much these timelines are going to add to the story. For me personally, it's hard to make heads or tails of it at the moment right now. However, it seems there's potentially 6 worlds that we know about, but there are certainly even more than that. Whether it's infinite or there's a finite number, we simply don't know yet. And I know some of you think that these worlds are just dreams, or you think it's something just in the live stream like the Dream of the Faith in 10. I actually think none of that actually matters because functionally you have different realities and different courses of events to keep track of, and that will be influencing the story in some major way. And so regardless of whether you perceive this as actual multiverse or not, functionally speaking, it's not really that big of a deal whether it is or it isn't. It ultimately kind of amounts to the same thing when experiencing the story. There are multiple versions of these characters experiencing a different chain of events, and that chain of events will be tied together. Shinra Arc also reports that Kazushige Nojima says that in writing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth scenario, he studied Yogacara and Jung's theory of the collective unconscious. Referring to these should make it easier to understand how the game's world works, and may even hint at the story's ending. This is something that you're going to want to follow people like Schrodinger's baby Seal for to talk about in a greater depth. He's super qualified to talk about that stuff, and I am not. However, if you are someone in the community watching this channel, leave a comment below on your theories on how this relates. I do read the comments, and I'd love to see what you guys come up with. Next, we have the death of Aerith. Nomura says that in the original Final Fantasy VII, in order to depict the cruel loss of someone you cherish, they had Cloud be a bystander as Sephiroth killed Aerith. In Rebirth, they wanted to fight back against Destiny and have Cloud make an effort to parry Sephiroth's attack. However, when you actually lose someone you cherish in the real world, you aren't able to accept it right away. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth strives to depict that inability to accept the loss of someone precious to you. Cloud's psychic interference reflects this state of mind. There is a ton of conjecture right now on whether Aerith is truly alive in another timeline, whether Cloud is in denial, Genova Aerith, and a number of other theories. I currently do not have a theory that I strongly believe in. I do certainly think that some of these theories are more likely than others, but nothing really stands out to me as it has to be this and nothing else. That being said, under the assumption that she is permanently dead, Cloud being in a denial state about this situation, and eventually discovering the truth in Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 could make for a very emotional moment. While the water burial is not featured here in Rebirth, I'm under the assumption that the water burial will be featured in Part 3, in the moment where Cloud remembers what truly happened to Aerith. Or maybe that's just my cope for the water burial not being a thing in this game, but I feel like it is eventually going to come. Now, another big mystery that's happening with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is the translucent materia. This was once a white materia that has now been deactivated. It's assumed that it currently possesses no power. However, it is going to come into play in Part 3 in some way. Nojima has in fact commented on this, asked if Aerith's white materia that has now turned transparent will also be key to future development. Nojima says yes. Toriyama adds that this is something that we can look forward to in the third game following Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Obviously, with the materia being translucent, it's essentially empty, possesses no power. However, I think it will be really interesting if this materia is filled with a new essence, and perhaps whatever new power ends up being stored in that materia is what ultimately ends up being the foil for Sephiroth's new plans. However, right now, it is currently very hard to say what this new materia will do and become. However, right now, it's one of the most interesting points of the remake project for me. This remake project as a whole has been depicted as a battle between Sephiroth and Aerith, a game of interdimensional 4D chess. The devs commenting on this saying, just before Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's final battle, Sephiroth says, "I underestimated you." According to Nojima, this line is directed at Aerith. When Sephiroth started to put his plan to reunite the worlds into action, Aerith rose up to prevent it. At first, Sephiroth didn't consider Aerith a major force to be reckoned with, but recognizing the obstacles she's proved up to this point, he remarks how he underestimated her. Indeed, while Sephiroth is more powerful than ever, it seems that so is Aerith. and it also makes me wonder if the Aerith that we see both there, as well as the Aerith with Cloud, an extension of her power as well. Then we have Cloud and Zack in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and their surprising, or not so surprising, team up at the end. Here is what they've had to say. Rebirth creative director Nomura says to think of Cloud and Zack fighting side by side against Sephiroth as a temporary state of entanglement. In that scene, he wanted to have Zack and Cloud link up, if only for a brief time, so he put in a request to have it made. So one of the notable things I want to talk about is when people are saying who wrote this story and who made all of these decisions. As I always say, this is a team effort, and so some people will say, oh, Kitase came up with this, or Nojima is the one that wrote the story, etc, etc. But when you actually read these interviews and actually break this information down, the story in Final Fantasy games is always hugely collaborative, and so if you love it, it's because you love the way all the team members synergized, and if you didn't like it, that's also an issue with team synergy. No pun intended, of course. Ultimately, all the creatives on the game are always making various different decisions like this. For example, with it being Hamaguchi's decision to put Sephiroth at the end of part 1. That being said, it was cool to actually see Cloud and Zack fighting together canonically depicted in Final Fantasy VII for maybe the first time ever. Although it was a cool fan service moment, I really want to know what it's going to contribute to the story down the line. What is the point of having Zack back in the first place? This currently remains unclear, and I suspect that part 3 is going to be a lot more direct about the true purpose of Zack in the overarching narrative. And as I've said before, I think it would be very interesting to see these two get a lot more on-screen time together than they got in this game. As I don't want the inclusion of Zack to simply end at fanservice, I want it to make a measurable impact on the story, such that it will actually elevate the story of Final Fantasy VII, and not just a way to include a fan-favorite character who was already dead. Seeing the return of Zack matter and have deep consequence to it is something I think imperative for the remake trilogy moving forward. But these are just my thoughts, and I'd love to hear yours in the comments below. And we should be getting even more Ultimania updates throughout the week as more things are translated. Be sure to look forward to more Ultimania translations coming throughout the week, and I'll see you all in the next video.